director of ISGAP. ISGAP is the Institute for the Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy. And we run a regular seminar series here at the law school, as well as at Fordham University, in the Lincoln Center campus in New York, McGill University, as well as Stanford of California. And we're actually starting a program on Monday at UCL beginning to expand. The focus of our work is to invite scholars to deal with issues of anti-Semitism from an interdisciplinary perspective. And in the law school, as the article or the general themes of the program here are legal issues, human rights, discrimination, and anti-Semitism. And just very briefly, next week we have also a lecture, and 1 week from today, we have Professor Gordon from North Dakota. He's an expert on issues of incitement to genocide and international law, and he's written many important articles, especially on the case of the Iranian revolutionary regime, international law, and incitement. Today we have a very special guest. We're deeply honored and grateful that Judge Rubinstein has come from far away to be with us today here at Harvard Law School. I'm especially grateful not only the fact that the Supreme Court judge will come here to our seminar series, but as it relates to issues of anti-Semitism, I know from people in the field in Israel that in a very humble way, in an unassuming way, that he's played a significant role in helping the Israeli government and the intellectual community to really consider the issue of anti-Semitism as relevant for the Israeli context. And today, in 2013, it's obvious to many of us who follow the issues that this is very important. But not too long ago, many Israeli intellectuals and policymakers perceived issues of anti-Semitism as being part of Galut, part of the exile, part of the problem of the shtetl Jew. And now we know it's really becoming, and it is a global phenomenon, a global problem. Judge Rubinstein was born in Israel and graduated cum laude from Hebrew University, where he had a bachelor's degree in Hebrew and Arabic, literature and grammar. He went on to law, where he attained a master's degree. He got his law degree in 1969. In 1974, he obtained a master's degree cum laude in contemporary Jewry. He served with the IDF from 1966 to 1970 and was a reservist and served as a judge in the military court in Judea and Samaria. In 1972, he was admitted to the bar after entering with the Office of the State Attorney in Tel Aviv and with the Ministry of Defense. From 1973 to 1977, he worked as a legal counsel at the Ministry of Defense. And from 1976 to 1977, he was the deputy legal counsel to the Ministry of Defense and the legal counsel to the Rehabilitation Division of the Ministry of Defense. From 1977 to 1986, he worked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as an assistant to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Deputy Director General, the legal counsel to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Minister, Deputy Chief of Mission to Washington, D.C. He was part of the diplomatic service and participated in negotiations with Egypt for the Camp David Accords in 1979 and helped to negotiate the peace treaties. He also was participating in negotiations with Lebanon and in negotiations with strategic cooperation with the United States with the personal title of ambassador. He went on from 1986 to 1994 and served as the government secretary with 4 different governments of Israel. As part of the position, he headed a legal team working with the United States government concerning investigations to the Iran-Contra affair and headed negotiating team with a memorandum of understanding between the government of the United States and the government of Israel on strategic cooperation. He was a member of the negotiating team that prepared the Madrid conference and head of the Israeli delegation that negotiated the Jordanian Palestinian delegation to Madrid and Washington, and headed the Israeli delegation, for negotiations on the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty. He served as the first chairman of Israel's anti-drug authority, and importantly, with our work, as the first chairman of the government forum to monitor issues of anti-Semitism. The list goes goes on and on. And I just want to say that somebody who's dedicated his life to public service and on such important key issues, and the law and to political issues, it's great that you're here. I just wanted to say that he was a recipient of the Gabriel Peace Prize for his part in the peace treaty with Jordan. He was given honorary doctorate degrees at Yeshiva University in New York and the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, as well as Bar Ilan University. He's an author of many books and articles, and thank you for being here.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Dr. Small. Name is small, but it's a big issue that you're trying to tackle. And issue. Good luck on that. I was impressed by your email that has this quotation from Rabbi Prince, who said that on anti-Semitism, that the most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. I'm glad to be here tonight. I mean, I say I'm glad there's a story about President Kennedy from here who went to visit the Alcatraz prison and was supposed to address the inmates, and he didn't know how to open up his remarks, so he said, "I'm glad you're all here." And he was right. So, Miriam, my wife, and I were here at Harvard many years ago. I was a visiting scholar at the law school over 30 years ago. It's nice to be here again. I'd like to open up with not after all this bio that Dr. Small read. I'm not going to tell you what I did or something of the kind. I want to put in sort of a personal context, but an Israeli typical personal context, my interest in anti-Semitism. This is not going to be a legal talk. It's not going to be an illegal talk, but it's not going to be a legal talk. It's more on the historical and the general sociological approach to it in Israel than when we started dealing with it in the 80s and now. My late father's family was shot into a mass grave in a little shtetl in Belarus back in August 1942. I remember exactly 50 years thereafter, in August 1992, I accompanied late Prime Minister Rabin to a meeting with President Bush, the father at the time, and I remember in the plane back thinking about the very special feeling of representing, I was the cabinet secretary in Jerusalem, representing the Jewish state the day, 50 years after my father's family was exterminated that way. In 1965, my late father wrote a will, a testament, a spiritual testament, not a financial one. And inter alia, he said that he never talked to my brother. I only saw it years after he passed away. That he didn't talk about the Holocaust and his experiences. He survived, obviously, because my brother and myself were growing in a Jewish independent state, trying to build itself, trying to build our own futures, and it shouldn't make our life, that's how we perceive it, miserable or more kind of sad by our young souls being, being, how should I put it, burdened with these memories. My mother came to Israel at the age of 8, 1922, and graduated the American University of Beirut. But inter alia was shipped by the British Army in 1945 to, as a member of a medical delegation to fetch Jewish refugees from Europe, whom the British didn't let enter Palestine early in the war, and sent them to exile in Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, and they were there for 4 years or so before they let them in after almost when the war was ending, somewhere in early 45. So, and my wife's family was all sent from Warsaw to Treblinka. And we're talking now a few days after the 70th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Rebellion and the end of the ghetto. So this is all there, but when we grew up, Miriam and myself, anti-Semitism was not on our map. Because indeed, as my father said, we were living through a period of growth, major changes and major developments in our young country. I joined the public service. I should mention that I learned about the Holocaust not from my father, from the gatherings of his shtetl Landsmannschaft, the people who remained, the survivors, but from the Eichmann trial. Eichmann trial took place when I was 14, 15, and I was listening to the radio. There was no television in Israel at the time, and this was our introduction. School curriculum did not include the Holocaust in those days, neither in my elementary school nor in my high school. But the Eichmann trial was the introduction. It took me years to understand what we're talking about in this respect, and it has become part of my DNA, as probably many people here too. And indeed, Israel developed into this society that we have problems of this and that kind, but basically technology, Torah, democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of press, a judiciary which I'm proud to be part of, Nobel Prizes to people, also complexity, Jews, Arabs, religious, non-religious, old-timers, newcomers, started in 48 with 650,000 Jews, now, thank God, about 6 million Jews, a very special number, out of about 8 million or so. It's a country that you're proud to be in. That's my feeling. I was just chairing the National Elections Committee, the last elections, and it was a celebration of democracy with all the shortcomings, with all the problems, and so on. Sometimes they accuse us of being a racist country. I think that it's a shame when this accusation comes up. What racist country would absorb willingly, bring with problems, with difficulties? 100,000 or so Jewish people from Ethiopia. No question about it. Anti-Semitism is the oldest social disease. It starts in the Bible. You read the book of Esther. Haman says to the king, there's a nation that is dispersed among the nations, and they are different and so on. So what's the solution? To exterminate them. There is a sad story in a midrash, in a text of the probably 4th century or so, that Emperor Adrian, the one who quashed the mutiny in 133, the Copper mutiny, sitting, that's what and it's based on a verse in the book of Lamentations, which says, Va'ita Hashem avatati shofta mishpati, the Almighty, you saw the distortion they did to me, please judge me rightly. This emperor is sitting with his ministers, and a Jew goes by and says hello to the emperor. And the emperor says, a Jew is saying hello to me, go kill him. Another Jew goes by, he sees what happened to the first. He says, he does not say hello to him. So he says, a Jew does not say hello to me, go kill him. So his ministers tell him, we don't understand what you're doing. And he says, do I need your advice to kill my enemy? So it's a very old, there was a rabbi by the name of Menachem Zemba, who was a prominent halachic authority in Warsaw, and he perished in 1943 throughout the rebellion in Passover. He has a short article on anti-Semitism written about 1936, I believe, in which he says there's no explanation to this, because he comes from some sages saying, which I won't go into, but he says some places they say the Jews are bad because they're capitalists, some say because they're socialists, some say because they're backward, some say because they're too progressive. So there's no real explanation. And a lot of people wrote about the rationale, if you can call it that way, but there's no. I was an assistant during my army service, and later also in academia, to the late General and Professor Shafat Harkabi, who was the person who described first Arab anti-Semitism, how it developed throughout the years of the state of Israel, the notion which we now see in different shapes and forms with extreme Islamic preaching. He described it, I worked with him, I read his analysis at the time. I also wrote a short article myself, academic, on the first appearance of the protocols of the elders of Zion in the Arab world, also during 1970. But again, it was part of learning, but not part of a feeling of any urgency. In 1975, the Zionist racism resolution was accepted in the UN, and President Herzog told the resolution on the podium. At the time, we looked at it as one of those UN aberrations which we have to fight. The UN has had lots of General Assembly decisions against Israel, much more than towards any country. And this resolution, by the way, was abolished in 1992. I was at the time in the negotiations with my Jordanian Palestinian colleagues, and I remember sitting with them when somebody came and told me this happened, and I told them, and they Nebuch said both Mabruk, which means Mazel Tov. 1997, I served as cabinet secretary. I did it for quite a number of years, and I was reading materials from various sources, and it dawned on me that this is something which Israel should monitor in an appropriate way. And I wrote a memo to Prime Minister Shamir saying, I'm quoting, I'm translating, whoever believed that the victory on Nazism did away with anti-Semitism and wanted to believe that in the penultimate decade of the 20th century there is no place for such dark beliefs which are against any factual or logical background, was disappointed. My feeling is, that's what I wrote, that matters will be worse, unfortunately, in the next coming years. So I suggested to Mr. Shamir to establish a forum monitoring anti-Semitic phenomena, and we did it with Israeli relevant agencies and with the with Jewish organizations that were monitoring it anyhow, and also with non-Jews in a few countries. And we did that for a number of years. It was continued after I finished in '94. We submitted reports to the government every year, and oral and written reports. And I remember when we started, a major figure in Israel had major positions in the country, approached me and said that, Eli, that's what we know each other very well, said, Eli, a government must deal with the present and the future. And anti-Semitism is a matter of the past. So why deal with it? And I remember when we submitted the first report to the government, I think it was '88, a major newspaper in Israel had a headline, that's all the government has in mind. I mean, what kind of issue is that? It's a bygone. And I'm mentioning all of that because this indeed was the attitude, and maybe because really it's not a very nice subject. It's a subject which you don't feel good in dealing with it. And as Dr. Small mentioned, some people would say, okay, so this is the exile or whatever. So the couple of years after that, Professor Israel Gutman was also a survivor, wrote in the Encyclopedia of the Holocaust, this is 1990, I believe. It's difficult to know or to focus whether anti-Semitism is, despite everything, in a process of going down, or it is having a winter sleep, and changes in the world may revive it as a strong issue. It's clear that anti-Semitism needs awareness and activism, not only not to let it get out of the battle, but to uproot a cancerous disease from the body of humanity. I don't think that it can be uprooted, but in my view, it does need awareness, activity. In our reports at the time, in the late 80s, early 90s, we related to the loss of shame that was connected with anti-Semitism after the Holocaust. And new generations come, and they don't know, and they don't care. And then on the far right and far left and extremist Islam. That's what we wrote at the time. And we were looking at developments after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, and we saw things that we see now too: the desecration of Jewish cemeteries, synagogues, of Jewish statues or statues commemorating the Holocaust. We remembered what Max Nordau said, that Max Nordau, for those who don't remember, was one of Herzl's partners in the early Congress, Zionist Congress. The Jews are not hated because of their bad virtues, but they relate to them bad virtues because they are hated. But we did not panic. We decided that we should cooperate with non-Jews, not only victims of anti-Semitism, but those who are members of the general society. For instance, I remember vividly working with Per Elmark, who was a Swedish former deputy prime minister. We started also talking diplomatically to countries where those events happened, and they accepted the Israeli involvement. They didn't see it as a problem. They see it, even some of them even consulted with us. Hungary at the time, Hungary again has a problem, but consulted, I remember, with us. We used to talk a lot, I personally, to the Egyptian ambassador, because there was a lot of cartoons in there, and Egypt had a treaty of peace with us, which I was proud to participate in. I think is very important to this very day. But their prime minister now, their new president now, has a background of this kind. You could learn, and we did it in the practical way, so to speak, that anti-Semitism is like, in a way, a skin disease, or whatever you call it, but you can't get rid of it. It changes its shapes, it changes its forms, but it's there. But nevertheless, and of course then popped up the identification of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Oh, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist. I think Nathan Sharansky, years later, had a good formula to check whether you're criticizing Israel, which is perfectly legitimate. Criticizing everybody else is perfectly legitimate. But when you do it in a certain way, that would be anti-Semitic. That is, if you do it in a double standard notion, like the UN resolutions, which there's a professor in New York, and Bayevsky, comes up all the time with materials on that. The double standard is a way to look at it. Delegitimization is a way to look at it. Demonization is a way to look at it. The three Ds: double standard, legitimization. That's my sub-round. And demonization. Those three Ds are good standards or measures to look at criticism, whether it is really a political, legitimate criticism or something which is basically a new guise of anti-Semitism. And we thought at the time that there are three major avenues to fight, even not hoping to erase, but fight. To leave it, and that's my pitch today also, leave it at the illegitimate, at the gutter. Leave it as a shameful matter that should not be accepted in a civilized society. And we thought about diplomacy, public diplomacy, and also private, regular, classic diplomacy. We spoke about education for the wider, for the longer range, and we spoke about legal matters also, legislation and enforcement. Now, what happened since then? I'm jumping to our times, 20 plus years gone by. Basically the same, more of the same, and more of the same. And the question is how and what indeed. I should mention that the internet did not exist in those days. Now it exists, and it's a major means for spreading whatever you want to spread, including anti-Semitism. And while in the, and also something very meaningful, sadly meaningful, when we started, there was no country on earth which called for the extermination of the state of Israel. There were the Arab-Israeli conflict, and there were all kinds of influences, but what Iran, Ahmadinejad, has been preaching for years now in a public way did not, at least the same level of official government calls for an extermination did not exist there. Denial of the Holocaust, which he preached also, did, as far as I remember, did exist already there, and that's, by the way, an area in which there's legislation in many countries and also enforced. While in the inner circle, Israel continues to build itself, to absorb Jews and so on, and to deal with all its problems, and to flourish. In the outer circle, you can see, and by the way, changes sociologically in Israel have taken place in this particular context. Holocaust studies are now part of the curriculum of schools, elementary school, high schools. Kids in, I think, 11th grade go to Poland, many of them, to visit. My daughters, we have 4 daughters, all of them went with the schools to Poland to visit it's a combined visit of Jewish history in Poland, and of course the Holocaust is a major theme. The next week will mark the Memorial Day for the Holocaust. It's connected with the date of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. It has become a marked day in Israel. The people relate to the Holocaust. Television, all channels are full of interviews with survivors, of stories of families. You know, now the museum culture and the television culture and so on, and I think it's positive, has moved from the general 6 million Jews, but now you see the Goldberg family or the Russo family from Salonika, or the person. He's not 6 million. He is somebody who lost his parents, and the survivors are still there. I every year go, this year I won't be there, but to the central ceremony in Yad Vashem, where people light 6 torches to commemorate 6 million. Always go and shake the hands of the survivors who were there, and their stories are told, and they are all, of course, octogenarians now, the people, almost all of them. And it has a mark on our national psyche. I don't want to talk about the question, when do you use the memory of the Holocaust in a general political context? That's not me, I don't want to go into that. But it's part of our psyche, of our DNA, this memory. I think it's now in a very general way in Israel. I think most Israelis here will agree, or all of them will agree with that. And Miriam had a relative who passed away some years ago and who had an Auschwitz number here. And I remember when we visited him in the hospital when he was dying, his hand was like that. And I told Miriam, I said, another witness is going away because people deny it never happened. Now, and of course, the UN has contributed to a great extent to this delegitimization and this double standard. You remember the Durban conference, a terrible show about 11 years ago, whatever it was, or whatever the intentions were, even the Gladstone report, I don't compare, but it was a bad document. The chairman went back on it. To the idea that is being pushed that we deal with the Palestinians the way the Nazis deal with us. Of course, whatever we deal with the Palestinians, the problems are subject to any legitimate criticism, this or that kind. But to compare it to the Holocaust. I remember I was the Attorney General of the country for quite a number of years. I remember one day a pre-scheduled meeting with officers, generals, on something connected with Gaza at the time, and they told me, you know, yesterday we had all the Hamas leadership in Gaza in one building, and we could do away with them. And we did not, because the building was they used one floor, and the building was civilian families were there throughout the building, so we didn't do it. Again, we make mistakes, but nothing to compare. You know, in I think it was 2009, there was this operation in Gaza, and I was already on the court, and from 2004, and I sat on all the petitions. You know, our court, the Supreme Court of Israel, takes petitions right away from, without going through the echelon of courts, as the court of original jurisdiction. And I sat in all the petitions that came throughout that operation, Kestled, I think it was called, and in all, they were on supplies of fuel, on medical matters, on even on freedom of press, on all kinds of supplies, humane problems, whatever. We dealt with all of them online almost. That is, the petition was submitted today, tomorrow, the next day, we'll deal with it, and we solved it together with the army people to make sure that the problems would be taken care of. So, it's something which always makes you feel very bad when you read those comparisons. Because there's a virtual world that is proliferation of what you read there. If you want to read, just today, one of Israeli sites reported on news sites on a series of anti-Semitic occurrences in all kinds of, Jews being bloodsuckers, warmongers, whatever. These are, by the way, also quotations from the current president of Egypt a few years ago, and he had to answer to that some time ago. The United States also, I'm not sure about his response. So while we still have, and of course you cannot be happy from what you read in Arab countries, including those who made peace with us, as I mentioned. And there's more, also not only in Arab countries, mainly away from extreme Islamist group, but in Europe. We don't have the time, but in Greece, in Hungary, in Ukraine, in Kyrgyzstan. Why Kyrgyzstan? I'm speaking from reports that our government has come up with, and having read them, sometimes it's countries that either do not have Jews or never had Jews or had Jews and they're not there. How many Jews are there in Greece to have a party pushing for? I should mention that there are also groups in these countries, the governments many times, these and other countries, international groups who do work to fight it. I shouldn't be just mentioning that this occurs. It would be unfair. But still, the existence of a strong party of this kind in Hungary, there's more monitoring than there used to be. Our government has now in Foreign Ministry a special division that monitors anti-Semitism. It didn't exist before. It wasn't the attitude of the ministry at the time. I had a retired, respected ambassador work with me at the time, but it was not institutionalized the way it's now. Other Israeli agencies deal with it. When I mentioned Hungary, by the way, that party had 15% of the popular vote. You had Toulouse tragedy some time ago. 3 kids and teacher, father of 2 of them was killed by Islamic extremists. Toulouse, France. Of course, the government there had its very important reaction. Sharansky believed, by the way, there was no government where anti-Semitism was a major issue that came out good for me. I don't know, but if it's true, it's good. There's also a proliferation, time and again, of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a forgery from the 19th century, French forgery found its way to the Russian secret police of the late 19th century. Later became as if really the Jews sit there and rule the world, and it repeats itself this way or the other, the media, the banking, the what have you. What should be done? First of all, should continue in Israel, now I speak from the Israeli perspective, to build the country, to hope that more people come to live in Israel, more Jewish people come to live in Israel. But no ostrich approach. We should strive, and we are legitimately qualified for that, to leave it in the gutter, to leave it illegitimate, to leave it shameful. And like Dr. Smol and his organization, like other Jewish organizations, like people who are even here, Professor Dershowitz, others, fight in every legitimate means. I said, and I believe it's a disease that it's difficult to erase. If you look at it as a skin disease or a mental disease, whatever, I don't know if you can cure it. You can try to manage it or to fight it. And there are enough fair people, you have to be fair, who would join this fight. And again, the means are political, diplomatic, media, legal, and educational. The message is don't sleep, see it, look at it, never disregard it. Combine efforts with organizations that are understanding, churches, very important. The state of Israel, thank God, flourishes despite anti-Semitism, and it's not part of our daily discourse, daily discussions. But many people are aware, and we should continue to give a hand to those who fight ourselves. There's something called the Global Forum to Fight Anti-Semitism, which our government has been promoting, that will convene again soon. I think it's a good idea. As Henry Kissinger once said, even some paranoids have enemies. We don't have to be paranoid, we don't have to panic, but we ought to make sure that, as I said before, it stays illegitimate. And all of you, whether you're Jewish or you're not Jewish, whether you, and the fact that you came here tonight means that you're interested. And when it comes as to face a strong response, not to think, oh, the wave will go and we'll be okay. Some people thought about it that way 80 years ago, and 75 years ago maybe, and look what happened. So, and I'd like to finish in an optimistic way. We are, as an Israeli, we are a few days before the Remembrance Day of the Holocaust, but also a week later is a Memorial Day of our victims of Israeli wars and terrorism, and our Day of Independence. And for me, being the son of Holocaust survivor, being the grandson of victims, to be able to stand here as a justice of the Supreme Court of Israel, of a democracy, of a flourishing country, as I said, with all the problems which it faces and with the criticism that it sometimes deserves, I'm proud that I can stand here. And I don't like the word revenge, but many a time when I asked my friends to address a circumcision of a grandson who has, and I see 4 generations of Jewish people in the room, and I say, this is the revenge against Hitler. The fact that there are 4 generations here, because he wouldn't have those generations come up when I was growing up, me and myself. most of my friends did not have grandparents. I had a grandmother on my mother's side. Everybody came to see what a grandmother looks like. It's a true story. So now they can see what a grandmother looks like. They can see my wife. She has 9 grandchildren, thank God. So they can see what a grandmother looks like, even a grandfather. Thank you very much.
Get some water for him.
I was rushing through the introduction. I did not mention that you were Attorney General. Sorry. I didn't know.
I was raged. When you write all this long thing, I
It's a
thought
cup, not even a
my
cup.
father would have enjoyed it, and my mother would have believed it.
There's not even a cup up here.
Please.
So
That
you
means
say
some
you
water.
can take the oxygen. I agree. In the intellectual community in the United States and the current administration of the United States, there is support for the Arab Spring, a lot of support and political goodwill, and hope that this is a beginning of democracy. When many of us study the rise of radical Islam, and I'm using the term deliberately, genocidal antisemitism, which is seemingly increasingly a problem. When Western countries are aiding the rise of some of these new governments or regimes, when the president of Jordan is leading to the Western countries not to support the Muslim Brotherhood.
There's no president. King, I don't know what it
King,
said.
sorry, the king. What should be an Israeli or a reaction of those who care about anti-Semitism with the rise of radical Islam, and the acquiescence, if not tacit support for the West?
Again, I'm not at this point in a decision-making position, and I think that what you just said, whatever is true, and whatever is a fact is a fact. And I said no ostrich approach. It means for everybody. And I think that a lot is, I hope that intellectual and academia and liberal people, I see myself as a liberal person on human rights, on rights of people who deprive from rights. Just to mention, a year ago, one of my colleagues, an Arab justice, we are an Arab on our Supreme Court, was seen as not singing the national anthem, Atikva, in a ceremony, and he stood there respectfully, and I came out publicly, which is unusual for justice, to say that what you can expect from an Arab, if he wants to sing, that's fine, but the national anthem, like in many countries, is a very, it's a Jewish national anthem. It speaks of the Jewish soul. It is homiyah, how would you translate it? Is exciting. He's not a Jewish soul. That's not. So I came up and I said, you can demand respect, which in the army, officers, they salute, if they are Arabs, if they are Jews, and so on. Why did I bring that? Because I'm a great believer in common sense. So I hope that liberal and intellectuals in this country or elsewhere would try to read the facts, to see. I always say, come visit our country. You think it's not good enough? Well, it deserves criticism many times. Come, when you criticize, see the facts, see what's going on, see how things are, see whether it's a true democracy or what some people try to. The same for this also. I think that if the means is people like yourself, others on campuses as well, just give the facts. And of course, if there's somebody who is a proven anti-Semite, go ahead against him. Why not? There was, I remember when you know, in Britain you can sue. Here in this country you have the First Amendment and all the limitations it poses. In Britain it's different, and there was this professor from Emory, Deborah Bedford, who sued in England David Irving, who's a well-known Holocaust denier, and on things that he wrote which had to do with her. And she won the case. I remember I was then Attorney General, and they approached me. Finally, they didn't use it, but they asked me to release, you know, Eichmann. He wrote a kind of a memoir in the period before, after the trial and before he was executed, and it was kept in the government archives, and the policy was for many years to leave it there and not to open it to the public. And I consulted with him, and the head lawyers, Professor Lips's lawyers, consulted with me and asked me whether I could release it, and we could release it. And I consulted with a number of experts, Bauer, Justice Landau, Justice Bach, people who were involved in the Eichmann trial, and finally I made a decision to release it. And then it was open to the public in general. I think it was the right decision, and it was done to make people face the fact, face the truth. And this was so I think what I said before is also the answer to it.
All over the world, there are unjust countries where people are suffering, and there is an identifiable group, the Jews. Can't we expect that they will continue to blame their troubles on the Jews and continue to divert attention from the suffering people to the Jews? And that's going to happen forever. Why should it never happen? Why should it stop?
I didn't say it will stop. I said specifically that, and very explicitly that I don't think when we began that we would try to do away with it generally, but there's a major difference between not being able to erase it forever when you have all the 2,000 years of more, if you go to the Bible, 2,500, I don't know how many years to count, and there's a difference between not being able to erase it totally, then not doing what you can do to delegitimize it, to leave it in the gutter, in the shame. I don't think there's a contradiction between the two.
You don't think it's part of Western culture?
Well, I don't see myself as a historian. It's part of, definitely, church history, but was used by communism, which was anti-church, so it's there, okay? Putin, I think, said it's a social disease. It does exist in Russia, and it does exist. So I will not be the historian or the sociologist to analyze exactly everybody. It's like Lehaudi, as they say. I don't want to compare, but Justice Potter Stewart here in this country once was dealing with a case on pornography, and he said, "I cannot define pornography, but when I see, I know." Remember that it's not exactly the same, but there's something to it. Yes.
It's a fair criticism of Israel to say that they so much wanted this to be a conflict, the conflict with the Palestinians. They so much wanted it to be about a border and not about Islam, not about the concept of, for example, legally in Islam, a Jew who is conquered as a dhimmi and a Christian who is conquered as a dhimmi, and he may not have legally right ever to have self-rule. Now that we see the Arab Spring bursting through, Islamism bursting through what looks like a pretty brittle and thin secularism in the Arab world. Weren't the Jews themselves in Israel a bit of ostrich, not wishing so much that it was a matter of compromise between borders, and not wanting to see that they had an existential problem?
Well, I don't think there's a contradiction. Again, I don't want to be going into kind politics, but in the relations, how the government describes the Arab Spring, whether they describe it as a spring or as the autumn or the fall, whatever. But I come from, I'd say, historically, from my work, and I am one of the few Israelis who have worked in all the 5 fronts or sectors of peace efforts with our neighbors, some more successful, some less, Egypt, Jordan, Palestinians, Lebanon, Syria, etc. I'd like to come in a way like quite a number of leaders in the past that I've known, and I think also now, but maybe it's not for me to comment on current people, a pragmatic approach. The analytically, maybe you're right, maybe not. I mean, analytically, our approach as a nation, should be pragmatic. Pragmatic means try to. It's only logical that we would try to make peace with our neighbors. It's only logical. I mean, I grew up. It was, let me tell you, it was nothing to do with anti-Semitism. For me, despite all these milestones that I was privileged to attend, the most moving moment in my life, I don't speak of personal, my wedding or my children, grandchildren being born, and so on, thank God, but as a public servant was to be at the airport when President Sadat came. And on November 19, 1977, then Chile, Saturday night. I was then the assistant to Moshe Dayan, whose name you may remember, was our Prime Minister at the time, and he invited me to join him to the airport, which was beyond my protocol rank, but I was very happy to join him. And I came, and I was there, and looking at what happened, his coming, was like the wind of history were there. That was my feeling that day, because it was not in the cards. If you asked me 10 days earlier, could this happen, that Sadat would come to Israel, 10 days earlier. And he said, he made a speech, he said, I go to the end of the war, I go to the Knesset, which means he said it, and still it was, not in the and a day earlier even, for sure, not in the cards. And he came and what developed later was not our dreams. I mean, we would have loved the peace to look better, but it's still there. And there were 30 years of wars and many victims, and thereafter 35 years without wars, with few victims, which is very sad, and with the cold peace, this or the other, but still. So you like to look at it. Jordan was mentioned. I was proud to be the chair of the negotiations for Jordan, the Treaty of Peace. There's an article there on promoting tolerance and mutual respect and religious. It's not being fulfilled that greatly. Still, the peace is there. You visit, you go, you can visit Egypt also. So it's better than any other alternative, except for the better alternative, which is not yet there. So, yeah.
Could you say a few words about, you mentioned laws that make Holocaust denial a crime. We couldn't have that in this country. Did you have it in Europe? Any reflections on that?
Well, we have one, of course, but there's a number of countries in Europe that have it, and it works. When it happens, it works, and they sometimes have real sanctions on people who do that. And it's important because as time goes by and years go by, and people either forget or read distorted histories or whatever, and there's a need for that. Again, some people say it's not legal matter, but legal matter helps like any other matter, a legal means that you can use, and in this, and I think also I'd say in a universal way, while we always say the Holocaust is unique in terms of what happened, human wickedness is there, and who was it that said, I think maybe Breck, that when they came for the communists, I don't know, you're right, I'm sorry, you're right. He said when they came for the communists, I didn't do anything because I was not a communist. They came for the Jews, I didn't do anything because I was not Jewish. When they came for me, there was nobody to help. So I'm not sure the quotation is exact, but that's the idea. And so it's also a universal educational thing because the liberal mind should be aware that what happens to one can happen to the other. Yes, there's the uniqueness of the Jewish problem because anti-Semitism problem because it's so long. You go back to the Bible. We survived. We are here, and it haunts us still. Well, our survival is a miracle. So, yeah.
Well, I travel a lot around the world, and I see. I was just in Malaysia, and I gave a speech in Malaysia without my yarmulke, and I found out that a lot of people just don't have the right knowledge about the Jewish nation. And the biggest problem I see when I go around, they think we're hundreds of millions of people. So I thought of a good idea for you, which is maybe a little humoristic, but maybe we should just come out with a campaign. We're only 14 million, and we can't get rid of us. Because whenever I tell people a real number, they say, oh, you're just 14 million. I think 14 million is even exaggerating a little, but literally people say, really, only 14 million? And they calm down a little. A lot of these people have never heard of, they don't know what really goes on, and they think we really have a little, probably over 1 billion people. And I think this is a cheap way of doing a good campaign.
Let me tell you something. It was 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more, I was in Mexico City, and I took a cab. I was in a conference, whatever. I took a cab, and he asked me where was I from, and I said, Israel. He said, we have Jews here too. I said, I know we have Jews here. And I said to him, how many Jews are here? There were about 60,000, 70,000 Jews in Mexico in those years. And he said to me, 2 million. I said, 2 million? I heard there are 60, 70,000. He said, they're making fun of you. So this is, I reminded me of this story. I go back to, it was a cabbie in Mexico. I attended a judicial conference in India some years ago, and there were mainly from what's known as the Third World participants. And it was so, I mean, for me, the ability to talk to them, they were all chief judges of Supreme Courts of various countries, and talking to them about our system, our country, and their reactions was, I mean, the information, just being informative. Of course, the court, the court system and the court part in the national life, but also on the country and this, and most of them really very nice, very intelligent, very learned people from the legal profession, and the information was very, well, lacking. It's a nice word, but so, okay, maybe 2 more questions, maybe here. Please.
Your Honor, how do we help communicate that our fellow Jews, well, I won't say are anti-Semitic, but are anti-Israel, consider Israel apartheid state, find fault with everything Israel does. These are Jews. I don't know if they're available in other countries in the world, but I certainly have met several here in the United States.
We have a movie.
Well, you remind me, I think it was 1983 or so, it was the 82 maybe, some Lebanon, our first Lebanon war. And I was on my way home, I was for a day in Montreal, I was the legal advisor of the foreign ministry at the time. And our consul general at the time told me that there was a Satmar Hasidim, I don't know if all of you know, but this is a Hasidic group which has been very anti-Zionist and didn't like the statehood, so to speak. And they were demonstrating against the war, the Lebanon war, under the consulate building. And the consul general at the time, his name was Yitzhak Meir, he went down just to see what's going on. And there was a French Canadian standing there from Quebec, Montreal. And the consul asked the person, who are these people? Well, c'est les rabbins, these are the rabbis. And he said, rabbis against Israel? The consul asked him, he said, c'est les rabbins anti-Jewish. These are the anti-Jewish rabbis. So you have all kinds of anti-Jewish rabbis. That was you were referring to. I always remember this story. And some of these people that you mentioned should visit Israel, really should visit. They can speak to Palestinians too, no problem. I mean, we will not, let them come. If their mind is open, if it's closed, it's closed. If their minds are open, let them come and visit. Let them talk to me, not me personally, to people, normal people there and who...
You're not a normal person, you know that.
I hope you're not...
You're a Supreme Court judge, you know, it's not a normal...
Look, the day Supreme Court justices will start thinking about themselves as not normal people, in Hebrew, the Supreme Court is called Beit HaMishpat HaElyon, the Supreme Court. Now, the justice is called Shofet Beit HaMishpat HaElyon. But many times, a justice of the Supreme Court, but many times people showed me and said Shofet Elyon. And I always stop and say, there's only one Shofet Elyon, it's somewhere up there, and so don't mix it. So thank God, the day I became a judge, I was years ago for a while a judge on the District Court of Jerusalem. And the day when I became a judge, I was a little bit, whatever. Which should be, by the way, every day. The Talmud says that a judge should always feel as if there's a sword here that punches him if he does the wrong thing. And I went to see a judge in Tel Aviv, a woman, she's now unfortunately deceased, and I spoke to her, and she said, and I sought her advice. She was a veteran judge, I was just becoming a judge. It was many, many years ago at Stekler. She said, look, the first day you sit on the bench, you'll think that Providence has gone down on you and has wrecked you. It's not true. So, I took this advice very carefully. So, last one maybe.
So recently, New Demographics came out talking about how there are now more Jews living in Israel than elsewhere. So the plurality of Jews worldwide are now in Israel. How do you see the relation of the Jew in Galut to the Jewish project, to the project against anti-Semitism, to the project against anti-Israel discourse, when one could say the Jew is now represented by Israel?
Look, I don't want to say the Jew is represented by Israel as an exclusive matter. The Jews in this country are part of this country. They are a legitimate, you don't need my definition. They are a part of, they are Americans, and they are also Jews. As an Israeli, I would hope they would support us. I would hope they visit. I would hope they give Jewish education to the kids. I would hope that as many as good would make on the live in Israel. That would be my Zionist hope as a Jew. But I'm not going to label anybody or to say I'm speaking for him. He will speak, he or she, they will speak for themselves. They will speak for, as proud Americans, they will speak whatever they feel they should speak. I do feel that education, on these issues or information on these issues is worthwhile, whether you're in Israel or in America or in Europe or anywhere. And it's not, the Zionist project is a Jewish project, but the support for the fight against anti-Semitism shouldn't be a Jewish project. Fight against anti-Semitism is we were very happy is not the word, but I remember that when throughout our deliberations with the American authorities, we learned at the time when I was dealing with these things that President Bush, the father, included it in the question of anti-Semitism in one of his major speeches. Then it also became part of the State Department policy in terms of their reports and so on, to monitor that. We thought it was the right thing, as other evils would be reported. I will not mix that with the notion of Israel representing. Israel represents a Jewish and democratic state, a Zionist idea, a past, present, and future. Whoever wants to join this project is welcome. Whoever is part of another society, it's his choice. Thank you very much.
I just want to add one thing. As an Israeli, as a Jew living in Israel, we're very proud of having someone like you in our community.
Thank you.